It was a Tuesday morning when everything seemed to align with the universe's grand plan, except for one small detail that would change the course of the day. The train station was buzzing with its usual symphony of footsteps, announcements echoing through the cavernous space, and the occasional screech of brakes as trains pulled into their designated platforms. I stood there, coffee in hand, watching the organized chaos unfold before my eyes when I spotted him, my coworker, Mark, running frantically toward Platform 7, his tie flapping wildly behind him like a surrender flag in a losing battle. Let me tell you about Mark. He's the kind of person who arrives 15 minutes early to every meeting, has his reports filed before the deadline, and always, and I mean always, catches his train. We've worked together in the marketing department for nearly 3 years now, occupying neighboring cubicles where we've developed a comfortable rapport built on shared deadlines, office gossip, and the occasional lunch when our schedules align. Mark is straight. Not that it matters in our day-to-day interactions, but sometimes these details color the way we relate to each other, creating invisible boundaries that neither of us acknowledges but both instinctively respect. I watched as Mark's expression transformed from hopeful determination to crushing disappointment as the 8:15 to Westbrook pulled away from the platform, accelerating into the distance with mechanical indifference to his plight. What struck me most wasn't his missed train, it was what happened next. The platform fell quiet. Not literally silent, of course. The station continued its ambient hum of activity, but there was a noticeable absence of the typical reactions you might expect. No cursing, no dramatic gestures of frustration, no phone call to the office explaining his impending lateness. You have to understand what this train meant in our professional context. We had a client presentation scheduled for 9:30, and Mark was carrying the updated slides with market research that had only been finalized late last night. Our boss, Catherine, had made it abundantly clear that this client was considering doubling their annual budget with us, and everything needed to be perfect. A missed train meant potentially missing the start of the presentation, which meant potentially losing client confidence, which meant potentially losing thousands of dollars in revenue. In our world, catching this train wasn't just about punctuality, it was about professional survival. The train station that morning was particularly crowded. The air carried that distinctive blend of coffee breath, perfume, and the metallic scent that seems unique to public transportation. Business people clutched their phones like lifelines, students huddled over textbooks making last-minute attempts to absorb information, and tourists consulted maps with furrowed brows. The platform itself was a microcosm of urban life, diverse, hurried, and strangely impersonal despite the physical proximity of its occupants. What fascinated me was how the other passengers reacted to Mark's misfortune. Most didn't react at all. They continued scrolling through their phones, adjusting their headphones, or staring blankly ahead as if missing a train was too commonplace to acknowledge. A few glanced his way with that universal look of commuter sympathy, a slight grimace, a barely perceptible nod that said, "Been there, tough break." But no one spoke. No one offered advice or commiseration. The collective response was a quiet acceptance that this was simply how the morning had unfolded for one unfortunate soul. I hadn't planned to approach him. Mark and I had a good working relationship, but we weren't exactly friends outside the office. There was an invisible line between our professional camaraderie and personal lives that we rarely crossed. But something about his solitary figure standing on that platform, watching his carefully planned morning disintegrate, compelled me to walk over. "That was the 8:15? I asked, knowing full well it was. Mark turned, surprise registering on his face when he saw me. "Yeah," he sighed, running a hand through his meticulously styled hair, disrupting its perfect arrangement. "I was literally 30 seconds too late." 30 seconds. The universe has a twisted sense of humor sometimes. I offered, taking a sip of my coffee. "You heading to the office?" "Trying to," he said, checking his watch for what was probably the 10th time in as many seconds. "I've got the presentation files for the Hendrickson meeting. Catherine's going to have a meltdown if I'm not there to set up before they arrive. Let me explain why this matters." In that moment, standing on the platform with the ghost of the departed train still lingering in the air, something shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden epiphanies or life-changing revelations, but the quiet platform created a space where our usual workplace dynamics temporarily dissolved. We weren't just co-workers anymore. We were two humans facing a common predicament. "When's the next train?" I asked, already pulling out my phone to check the schedule. 23 minutes, Mark replied without hesitation. He'd clearly already calculated this, along with all the subsequent delays it would create in his morning. I'll never make it in time to set up properly. I considered this for a moment. What if we share a ride? I was about to call an Uber anyway. The traffic shouldn't be too bad this time of morning, and we might actually get there faster than the train. The look of relief that washed over his face was almost comical in its intensity. "Are you serious? That would actually save my life. Or at least my job." "Don't be so dramatic," I laughed, already opening the app. "Catherine's terrifying, but I'm pretty sure she draws the line at actual homicide." As we waited for the car to arrive, something unexpected happened. We talked, really talked, not just about work or the weather or other safe topics that fill the space between cubicles. Mark told me about his sister who was going through a difficult divorce, how he'd been helping with her kids on weekends, and why he'd been so exhausted lately. I shared my own struggles with my apartment building's never-ending renovations and how the constant noise had driven me to work from coffee shops more often than not. The quiet platform had somehow created a conversational vacuum that we felt compelled to fill with genuine human connection. It was as if the missed train had derailed not just Mark's carefully planned schedule, but also the carefully maintained boundaries of our professional relationship. When our ride arrived, we continued talking during the journey to the office. Mark confessed his anxiety about the presentation, not just because of Catherine's expectations, but because he genuinely believed in the campaign he'd helped develop. "I know it sounds cheesy," he said, staring out the window at the city passing by, "but I really think this strategy could make a difference for them. They're a small business trying to compete with these corporate giants, and our approach could actually help level the playing field a bit." I'd never heard him speak with such passion about a project before. At the office, Mark was always the consummate professional, efficient, focused, and somewhat reserved. This glimpse of his personal investment in his work revealed dimensions to him I hadn't previously considered. "That doesn't sound cheesy at all," I assured him. "It's actually refreshing to hear someone care that much about the work. Sometimes I think we all get so caught up in deadlines and metrics that we forget there are actual humans on the receiving end of what we do." He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps also seeing me in a new light. "Exactly," he said with a nod. "Exactly that." We arrived at the office with enough time for Mark to set up the presentation and for me to grab us both fresh coffees. His with 1 sugar, no cream, a detail I'd observed over countless morning meetings but never had occasion to use until now. When I handed him the cup, he seemed momentarily surprised that I knew his preference. "Thanks," he said, the word carrying more weight than the simple gesture warranted. "For everything this morning. I would have been completely screwed if you hadn't shown up." "Just good timing," I shrugged. "Or bad timing, depending on how you look at it. For what it's worth, I think the presentation is going to go great. Your strategy is solid. The Hendrickson meeting did go well, better than expected, actually." The clients responded enthusiastically to Mark's presentation, and by the afternoon, Catherine was practically floating through the office with the news that they'd not only approved our proposal, but had indeed increased their budget allocation for the campaign. In the celebratory chaos that followed, with Catherine ordering champagne and the entire department gathering in the conference room, I found myself standing next to Mark again. The parallel to our morning encounter on the quiet platform wasn't lost on me. "Looks like missing that train worked out okay after all," I commented as we watched Catherine pop the cork with practiced efficiency. Mark smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes in a way his usual professional demeanor didn't allow. Maybe the universe's sense of humor isn't so twisted after all. What happened that morning on the platform stayed with me long after the champagne had been consumed and the excitement had died down. It made me think about the artificial divisions we create, between professional and personal, between different types of people, between the lives we present to the world and the ones we actually live. Mark and I came from different backgrounds, had different lifestyles, different perspectives on many things. He was straight. I was not. He lived in the suburbs. I embraced city life. He planned meticulously. I often thrived in spontaneity. Yet in that moment of shared humanity on a quiet platform, none of those differences seemed to matter. In the weeks that followed, things between Mark and I shifted subtly. We began having lunch together more regularly. He would ask my opinion on campaigns that weren't directly related to my projects. I found myself stopping by his cubicle to share interesting articles or ideas that reminded me of conversations we'd had. The invisible boundary hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had become more permeable, allowing genuine friendship to develop in the spaces where once there had only been professional courtesy. One afternoon, about a month after the train incident, Mark stopped by my desk as I was packing up to leave. "Got a minute?" he asked, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Sure," I replied, setting my bag down. "What's up?" "I wanted to ask your advice about something," he began, then paused as if reconsidering. "It's not work-related. It's about my sister's situation. You mentioned your friend went through something similar, and I thought maybe." He trailed off, but I understood. This was a new threshold we were crossing, explicitly seeking personal advice, acknowledging that our relationship had evolved beyond the confines of our job descriptions. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair beside my desk. "I'm happy to help if I can." We talked for nearly an hour, long after most of our colleagues had left for the day. Mark shared his concerns about his sister's emotional state, his worries about how the divorce was affecting his niece and nephew, and his uncertainty about how best to support them all. I listened, offered what insights I could from my friend's experience, and most importantly, created a space where he felt comfortable expressing these vulnerabilities. As we finally prepared to leave, the office now quiet and dimly lit by security lighting, Mark paused at the elevator. "Thanks for this," he said simply. "It's not always easy for me to talk about this kind of stuff." I nodded, understanding the unspoken complexities behind his words. "That's what friends are for," I replied, the term friends hanging between us as a gentle acknowledgement of our evolved relationship. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and as we stepped inside, I found myself thinking about how a missed train and a quiet platform had created the conditions for this unexpected connection. How sometimes it's in the disruptions to our carefully planned routines that we find the most meaningful encounters. How the spaces between our scheduled destinations can become the most important parts of our journey. Life continued its forward momentum, of course. Projects came and went, deadlines loomed and passed. The office politics ebbed and flowed with their usual rhythm. Mark and I maintained our friendship, finding a comfortable balance between our professional collaboration and personal connection. We never explicitly discussed the boundaries that had once seemed so fixed, but we no longer felt constrained by them either. Sometimes I think about that morning on the platform, how the universe conspired through a 30-second delay to create a moment of authentic connection. I think about how easily it might not have happened at all. If Mark had run a little faster, if the train had been delayed by even a minute, if I had chosen a different morning to take the train instead of my usual bus. So many variables had to align perfectly for our paths to intersect in that specific way. It reminds me that beneath all our carefully constructed identities and roles, coworker, professional, straight, gay, urban, suburban, lies our shared humanity, waiting for quiet platforms where we can recognize ourselves in each other. Sometimes all it takes is a missed train and the courage to cross the platform, to approach someone in a moment of vulnerability, to say simply, "That was the 8:15?" And sometimes, in the silence that follows a departure, we find arrivals we never expected. Total _char_count, 17,528.